The Velar.
Dee-da-dee-la-dee-da.
It's probably fair to say that Jaguar Land Rover has mastered the art of PR. And by mastered, I of course mean writing big fat checks to celebrities and hipster venue owners.
The Velar creates a different space for Range Rover. Its compelling design, its tailored technology, and its relevant innovation, and they combine to create a vehicle that will truly resonate on an emotional level.
Maybe I'm just being cynical though. I mean, maybe Brody from Homeland and this guy that designs the Range Rovers really do like each other this much. And all joking aside, if I was a celebrity, I would definitely be happy to take Jaguar Land Rover's money to stand next to or sit inside of one of these. It is an absolute beauty. It really is. Compared to the other Range Rovers, it's low and wide and, I hate this word, it's sleek. Well, the door handles are anyway. And some of the detailing is fantastic. Like this badge that you only see when you open the doors, and the LEDs, and the Union Jack perforations in the leather and in the speaker covers. So it looks cool. Argument over. But you're probably wondering why, when there's a Range Rover Sport already, there's also this one, which is sort of the same size, but just looks nicer. Land Rover says it fits here, a place the company calls the white space between the Range Rover Evoque and the Range Rover Sport. Nah, I didn't know that space existed either. But what do you know, a quick gander at the starting prices of all the Range Rovers reveals that it does indeed sit slap bang in the middle of those two cars. At the top end of the range, it starts to make the Evoque look like the essential Range Rover it actually is, but it's still cheaper than the Sport. And from this end of the car, that looks like really good value, more like it should be in this space. From here, it's a slightly different story. So I'm sat behind my driving position and it just doesn't feel like there's Range Rover levels of legroom back here. Headroom's okay though. And it's okay for kids, but back to the front, it's the dashboard that's the real party piece in here anyways. Now Range Rover might be all
Haughty, hoity, stick it up your tighty, high and mighty.
but I know where the inspiration for these screens really came from. Yep, just as McDonald's replaced something unpleasant to interact with and generally unreliable with a touchscreen, so too has Land Rover with its dashboard buttons. This twin screen setup is spectacular. Now I could spend the rest of this video banging on about how amazing these screens are and how they work, but it's enough to say that the software is of the rare type that works as well as the stuff in your phone does. It's all bright and bold and clear and fathomable, and it makes the stuff in the other Land Rovers feel like a Nokia 3310. The bottom screen here is the party piece one, but even the main infotainment screen is like a proper widescreen and it tilts. Just a quick interjection here to say that although these screens are brilliant, for some reason Land Rover doesn't use Apple CarPlay and the other Android one, which is stupid and sucks. So you can set it to the right angle to see it. And the fully digital instrument binnacle is really cool too, albeit there is something about it that doesn't seem quite up to Audi standards somehow. Ah, not up to Audi standards. Now there's a thing. There is a thing. See, for all its really impressive cabin and the fact that there's a lot to love about driving this thing, which I'll come to in a minute, you can never quite escape the underlying whiff of fragility in here. The list price of this particular car with its options and its Caramac interior is £70,000. And there's stuff in here that you just wouldn't see in a German SUV for the same sort of money, like all this bottom level plastic, which is rubbish, and some of this switchgear in the doors, which is straight out of all the cheaper Jaguar and Land Rover stuff. Now, of course, all manufacturers pod share across their ranges. Maybe it's just that stuff's a bit more obvious in the context of the coruscating high technology of the screens. But what you wouldn't ever find in a 70 grand Audi, say, is a 4-cylinder diesel engine. And even if Audi did do one, it would bloody well make sure that it didn't sound like this, which kind of brings a more literal interpretation to the phrase Chelsea tractor. And I don't want to be too harsh, because in the Velar this is by far the best application of JLR's 2-litre diesel engine. It's genuinely really quiet on the motorway, and this 240 horsepower version is pretty quick as well. But the fact is that you'll probably expect something a little bit smoother and a little bit more sophisticated in a car that's this plush and this expensive and this beautiful. And you can swerve it if you like anyway, because as you can see here, there is a 3-litre 6-cylinder diesel that isn't that much less economical, is much quicker, is much smoother, and more importantly, doesn't make you twist your face when you're accelerating between 30 and 50 miles per hour. But in fairness to Land Rover, this is the way things are going. I mean, BMW does a 4-cylinder diesel in the X5 now, and Mercedes does 4-cylinder diesels in its GL stuff. And on paper at least, Jaguar Land Rover's 4-cylinder diesel does compare quite well with that stuff. So let's move on to the driving. Land Rover has very clearly tried to imbue this with a dual character. Something you can either float in, classic Range Rover style, or drive in, classic Porsche SUV style, because that's a thing these days. Does it work? It does, yeah. Mostly. Just like the engine, on paper, the Velar has plenty going for it. I bet you somebody at Jaguar Land Rover could show you a fascinating graph of the amount of extra lateral Gs this thing can pull compared to the big Range Rover. There is a quite unbelievable amount of corner and grip here, but more noticeable than that is the steering, which is hot hatch sharp. So you combine those two characteristics and you have a massive car that can do a decent impersonation of a much smaller one. However, Land Rover very obviously targets Porsche Macan drivers with the Velar. It does so by calling it the most road-biased Range Rover there's ever been. Useful quality being road-biased in a car. But the fact is, it is nowhere near as dynamic as the Porsche. And that's mainly because the body control is still very much in Range Rover territory, so it still rolls a lot. And therein lies the difference between being sporty on paper and being sporty in real life. Driving this fast, and especially cornering fast in it, feels like doing dressage on the back of a hippo. It's very impressive, but in a really weird and unnatural sort of a way. Thankfully, most of the time that means it's still just a normal Range Rover, which means it's one of the most relaxing things on 4 wheels, and it's also very good off-road. And you know, the boot is perfectly large and it has a nice flat loading floor, although it is a little bit down by volume compared to some of the other stuff you might be thinking about at this price. And really, that's the thing about the Velar. In areas of quality and finesse, it's a typical Range Rover in that overall, it doesn't quite reach the heights that the German stuff does. However, it is in possession of a whole heap more character than them, and for many, that will be the deciding factor. Plus, that cabin, damn it. Okay, thanks for watching. Leave your comments underneath and like and share the video, please. We'd appreciate that. And go to HonestJohn.co.uk for the best reviews on the big internet. Thanks, bye then.